And so it really comes back down to love and kindness. How much can you love yourself? How much more can you love yourself? Like right now, today, how many more little activities can you perform today that shows kindness to yourself? How friendly are you with yourself? How kind are you to yourself? Doing little acts of kindness for yourself, treating yourself nicely. That means consequently, you will treat other people nicely. If you practice that, the more you practice that, the easier it is to resist other people. The easier it is to resist less around you, right? Resist other people less, resist life less, because now you're resisting yourself less. And then, so what happens is you're now getting into a flow state.
Hello and welcome to the Real Success Show. I'm your host, Candice Mama. If you're sitting at home and you're wondering how you're going to manage to get up again, how you're going to rebuild your life, how you're going to set new goals and actually live a life that fulfills you, then today's speaker is just for you. His name is Allan Kleynhans, and he is a master facilitator and life coach who's going to transform the way we think. But before we jump into it, if you like this episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find us. Now, without further ado, here's Allan. Allan Kleynhans, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Real Success Show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I must say, it's so lovely to speak to a South African because you say my name perfectly. I can't tell you how many interviews I've done over the years where people say, they ask me my surname before the interview and they say it and they practice. And I've even given people cues like, listen, can you say Calvin Klein? Yes, I can. Okay, good. Then just say Calvin Kleynhans, right? And then they practice. And then when they do the introduction, they botch my surname completely. So I'm so glad to speak to you.
I'm so glad. Well, you know what? You have my mother to thank, who took me to Afrikaans pre-primary school. So my Afrikaans is like on point. I've
lost my Afrikaans completely. I was tweetalig, as we used to say. And, when I came out of the military, all I could speak was Afrikaans. And I had to re-educate myself for English. But now living in the UK and living abroad for so many years, I've lost my Afrikaans. And I've got cousins in Cape Town that only speak Afrikaans. So when I go there, I have a bit of a challenge trying to understand them.
I think it's most people who have a different kind of dialect, and then you move to a new city or a new place and you lose it. And then you just connecting becomes interesting. I don't want to say difficult, it becomes interesting. But I really want to dive into, how do you define yourself? Like when people ask you in an elevator or wherever you are, Allan, what do you do? What are the things you say to them?
If I was in an elevator and somebody said, what do you do? And it was an elevator pitch, I just say very simply, listen, I help people to become butterflies. I've been helping people to become butterflies for 22 years, men, women, children. I believe that, whenever you're around somebody, you're going to have an impact on them, and you can decide what kind of impact you're going to have on them. So for the longest time, I've always sought to have a powerful, positive impact on somebody, even if I'm with them for only a few seconds, even if it's just a smile can carry a long way in somebody's life, because you never know who you're going to meet, right? You never know what they're up against. And you can just simply smile at somebody, and that little interaction can change their whole day. It can change what they're thinking about. It can change what they're focusing on. And you never know, somebody could be thinking, the darkest thoughts and contemplating the darkest possibilities, etc. And then you smile at them and suddenly it gives them a little glimmer of hope. And they think, well, you know what? Life is not that bad, actually,
Oh, I absolutely love it. And in the beginning of our conversation, you were speaking about, when you came out of the army and, you were speaking Afrikaans fluently. So you were actually in the army. And when you came out, you had a lot of PTSD, which led you onto the path that you're on now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that journey was like, that, coming out and almost trying to adjust to a world that was so unfamiliar to you, especially from where you came from?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I go right back to when I was born in 1966 and I grew up, I'm sure you know Durban pretty well. And most people know where Point Road is. It's not Point Road anymore. The names have changed. However, when somebody says Point Road, if you're from South Africa, or definitely if you've been to Durban, you'll know that place. And I grew up next to Point Road Police Station, right next door to Point Road Police Station, right? So I played in a little courtyard, and on the other side of a wall at the end of the courtyard was the police yard. And so that was a very interesting, we use the word interesting or fascinating education, for a young boy of 3, 4, 5 years of age, who, I climbed on the wall at times and looked into the police yard through a little gap in the wall that nobody knew existed except me. I never told anybody about what I saw there, even though it was very, very brutal and very terrifying, because I figured that I was going to get into trouble if anybody knew what I was doing, And so, but that created a massive amount of uncertainty and a feeling of not being safe, And I always had that feeling. I carried that feeling right through my entire life without really understanding what was driving me unconsciously until I got into psychology much later. That was obviously exacerbated by the fact that I was bullied as a kid at school. And then, the cherry on the top was when I went to the military. It was compulsory at the time. I just happened to be, that particular intake of 86 and 87, which is when I was in the military. We just happened to be, posted in different places all over the country. In 86, it was a state of emergency in South Africa. There was all kinds of rioting in Cape Town. I saw some horrific things down there when I was posted there for a while. And then I served 7 months in Angola during the civil war that was taking place there. And again, that was like, just a brutal experience, horrific. I lost friends. I had to do things I wasn't, we're not designed as human beings, to hurt each other. Our essence is connection and kindness. So I had to deal with that and process that, when I came home. And, I locked myself away for about 6 months and just drank myself to sleep every day because I had nightmares. And I had nightmares for about 7-8 years. I had post-traumatic stress for about 9 years until I eventually managed to begin to, do some deep-seated healing. That healing has continued to this day. I still find another layer in myself to release. I always talk about peeling an onion. You're always peeling your onion, right? And there's always another layer. There's always another level of the onion. And underneath that other layer, there's more stuff to deal with. So it was difficult, right? Because, I was 21 years of age. It was 1988. South Africa was a very different place to what it is now. Even though I grew up as an only child, right? My parents were both married before, then they got married, had me. And, I was called a light lamaki. I'm sure you've heard that term. And, my mother was 41 years of age when she had me. And in 1966, that was pretty unheard of, right? And, so as an only child coming out of the military, and also, I had to sign a document, Candice, before we went into Angola, we had to sign a document saying we'd never talk about what we were going into. We were sworn to secrecy. So I kind of had to process that on my own, with the idea that I couldn't tell anybody about it or I couldn't talk to anybody. And so it was difficult. And, growing up in a family where my parents always encouraged me to judge people by their character, not the color of their skin. In South Africa, we grew up, especially when I grew up, there was loads of racism. There's still racism everywhere these days in every part of the world. However, it's more subtle, right? But in South Africa, it was quite in your face. But my parents encouraged me, that you should always be, kind to people, no matter where they come from, who they are, etc. So, when I moved to England, about 18 months after I read Think and Grow Rich, which is about 6-7 months after I came out of the military, I read Think and Grow Rich. And that was kind of like that was a suggestion by a friend of mine who was also in the same operation as me. And he said, listen, you need to read, you need to start focusing on literature that's going to help you to process what you've been through. Otherwise, it's a very slippery slope, if you don't deal with it in an intelligent fashion. And so he encouraged me to read. And then I became a student for the first time in my life at 21 years of age. I never considered myself a student. I went to 2 private schools. My parents always reminded me how much it was costing them. And, and I failed my way through my education. As I'm sure Robin Banks, right? And, Robin's a very, very good friend of mine. And I love to borrow his line. I got an E for enough when I left school. I just made it, right? However, at 21 years of age, when I read Think and Grow Rich, I became a student for the first time because I became so, I was blown away by what I was reading, right? I just loved it. And then that book led me to other books. And then 18 months later, I left South Africa and I came to England. And only when I looked back at South Africa from England, I realized how indoctrinated we were, being white in South Africa. Even though you grew up in a liberal family, you were still in the system, right? And so it was a difficult time for me, but I'm so glad and I'm very, very blessed that I had that experience, and I don't regret a single thing, because that has led me on to so many amazing experiences when I've been able to work with veterans and, ex-police personnel, people who have been, had some seriously, traumatic experiences, people from South Africa, and I came back to South Africa 12 years later, and I spent 7 years there doing a lot of great work there, and I worked with a lot of people individually and groups in companies, etc., and was able to make a difference because of my experience as a soldier in South Africa. And had I not been through that experience, I never would be doing what I'm doing now. I don't believe that. And now, it's taken me all around the world, and I'm very, very grateful for the experience. And I've done a lot of work, on that. And I think, I always tell people, you don't have to have been to war like me. You don't have to have done the things that I've done, but everybody's fighting their own battle inside their own head. And everybody's battle inside their own head is as big as anybody else's, right? And so that's why we need to remember that, people are doing the best they can. And we always have to be conscious of that when you interact with people. It's like, because when you leave, like I said earlier, right? When you meet someone, could be a few seconds. And when you leave them, how are you going to leave them? Are you going to leave them feeling better than they were when you met them? Or are you going to leave them feeling worse than they were? And that's down to us, right? Individually.
Oh, I love that. And you said something there where it reminded me of a quote, I believe it was by Winston Churchill, who said, I would rather have the whole world against me than my own soul. And I think that's what happens, right, in our minds, that, with your experience is a big experience. But I think, Allan, a lot of people will look at you and say exactly that. They'll say, Allan, you've been to war, you've suffered with PTSD, you lived in this country that was volatile. Like my story, I mean, it's just my dad who left me, or it's just this little thing. And they minimize their own experience, right? Because they're comparing it to yours. And so when you're working with people, like, how do you allow them to acknowledge their own pain, I'll say?
Yeah, that's a great question, because healing is messy work, right? And it's doing the introspection, doing the deep inner work is the kind of stuff that people shy away from, because they're afraid of what they'll discover maybe. But also people don't like to acknowledge their own flaws. They don't like to acknowledge their own weaknesses. However, it's not really acknowledging a weakness if you are willing to see where maybe you might be traumatized at some level. We all suffer trauma. Every single person suffers trauma, but there's varying degrees of trauma, right? There's very subtle trauma where maybe perhaps you may have been scolded as a child, right? But it still left its mark on you because you still had a perception about that scolding. You still processed that scolding in a particular way that made you feel maybe like, okay, I shouldn't speak out, right? Or I shouldn't be, outspoken, or maybe I shouldn't be so confident, or etc. And then you become somebody who's maybe you become reclusive, or maybe you become someone who's introverted, right? And then you never really find your voice. And so many people, especially women, right? Especially women, and this is all around the world. There's so many women who are now finding their voice in a very powerful way, and realizing that actually they were told to shut up when they were young. That they had to just stay in the background because it was a man's world, right? Or perhaps maybe their brothers were more important than they were. So it's I think it's just about encouraging people to recognize that actually, we all have this amazing potential, and at the same time we also have these unconscious mental constructs that are in our own way, that we are really just vibrating continuously without realizing it, that we have maybe a perception of ourselves that's limiting us, and people say things like, I'm shy. I'm shy is just a nice way of saying I'm afraid, and if you can just admit that, I'm afraid to speak out, I'm afraid to sing, I'm afraid to get on a stage, I'm afraid to approach that person, I'm afraid to tell this person I love them because I'm afraid that they might reject me, little things like that. Those little things are just little things that have progressed over time, that have come from a simple thing like, hey, keep quiet, sit down, don't say anything, right? And that progresses over time, and then it becomes this mental construct that is preventing us from actually expressing who we really are, right?
I've never heard it put like that before, which is, I'm shy is just a subtle way of saying I'm afraid. Oh, that is so profound. And you just mentioned a little bit earlier that Napoleon Hill's work, Think and Grow Rich, is really what started your journey. It changed your mindset. And of course, it's a pivotal work in self-help, right? So yes. What about it for you in particular? Like, what was it that as you were reading this book, like it gave you that moment, that light bulb moment?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I've actually got goosebumps right now. I can remember that moment right now when I read the line, every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit, right? And I read that line and I was 21, 7 months out of the military, you know, drunk every day, smoking marijuana, taking LSD. You know, I was diagnosed as ADHD in those days, although we didn't have a term for it back then. You know, I had bipolar, and now on top of that, I'm trying to process what I've been through. I'm having nightmares, and I read this line in this book, right? And I remember thinking immediately, that's BS, right? And I immediately thought of Angola, and I immediately thought, how can that be beneficial in any way, shape, or term, right? That's BS. But then I remember what my friend said to me when he gave me the book, and he was on the same operation as me, although he was in a different particular role. He was a medevac, and he was flying into Angola and taking the wounded and the dead soldiers back to the military hospitals. And he said to me, he said, listen, he was very emotionally mature, and I refer to him in the past tense because several years later he was killed in a car accident, and you know, bless him, he's still one of my angels to this day, right? And but I remember he said to me, he said, listen, read this book as if the author is sitting opposite you and he's talking to you, and it's the most important thing you've ever read in your life and the most important thing you've ever heard. Like, pay attention, right? Make notes. You can highlight chapters like I've done, and the book was all highlighted, etc. And when I read that line and I said to myself, that's BS, I said, okay, cool. I remembered what my friend said. So I wrote the line down and I put it on the wall, and I looked at it every day and I thought, what does that actually mean, right? And I contemplated that over and over again. And, you know, and I refer to that often, right? That's why I was so glad you asked that question, because to this day, now I talk about that a lot. And I mention that, because adversity is a great teacher, right? And every single person on this earth is going to experience adversity at some point in their life, right? And there's different types of adversity. Some of us go through very, very tragic, you know, traumatizing adversity. Some of us go through milder adversity, but we all have our own perception of it, right? Which affects us. And it's not what happens, it's what we make it mean inside, right? So I wrote that down, I contemplated it, and over the years, and now I can tell you with absolute conviction and my hand on my heart that every single adversity has the seed of something amazing within it, right? Something equivalent, something greater. And, you know, and then I talk about, you know, Angola. And, you know, I've been fortunate to be able to travel all around the world speaking for the last 22 years. And I've been to Russia many times. And I remember in 2017, Candice, I went to Russia on a 12-city tour, right? And 2017 was 30 years after I was in Angola, 87. And 30 years later, I'm in 3 different cities. And the first time it happened, I could not believe it, right? I was like blown away. But this man came up to me in the break after I'd been speaking for a couple of hours, and I told my story, and I was about to do a full day of content. And he came up to me in the break and he said, listen, you know, I've got to say thank you for coming to my city, and thank you for telling your story so transparently. He said, I was in Angola fighting against you in 87. And he said, you know, just listening to you, I realized that there's things that I haven't taken care of, and as a result, I've kept my family at a distance, right? And they don't really know who I am. And he thanked me for that, and we both hugged and we cried. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said, I'm so glad that you did not die in that war, because otherwise you wouldn't be here now. And I'll tell you what, it blew me away, right? And then it happened 2 more times. So 3 different cities in 2017 on a 12-city tour, 3 men came up to me. Only one of them let me take a photograph. The other 2 were still in the military, so they didn't want to let me take a photograph. Even though I said to them, I just wanted for my own keepsake, right? Just to remind myself that actually happened, right? Because, like, I mean, I even looked at that photo just recently. I looked at that photo. I remember I was going through my photo. So, oh my God, there's that guy, right? And I mean, that blew me away. It's interesting, you know, how the universe unfolds, you know. And now, so I can say with absolute conviction, every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent of greater benefit, right? Everything you're going through, every challenge you're going through, there is a reason for that. There's possibility for growth. There's a benefit there. You have to look for it. John DeMartini talks about the same thing. You know, every guru on this earth has talked about the same thing. Louise Hay, Maya Angelou, you know, you name it, right? They've all said the same thing, that the gift is in the challenge, right?
That is such a phenomenal story. And I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that did for you. So Like when the first person, second person, I mean, by the third person, how were you feeling? Like on your way back home, how were you feeling?
The third time it happened, I remember I put my head back and I just laughed out loud. And the guy who was talking to me, he was an officer in the Russian army. And he looked at me and he was confused. Then I put my hands on his shoulders and I said, listen, my friend, I'm going to tell you, this is the third time this has happened in the last 8 weeks. I said, the universe has got an amazing sense of humor, right? God is so clever. I said, we talking now. I said, can you really understand that this was meant to happen? And he looked at me and he was at first he was a little bit, he was taken aback. And then he said, well, he said, I do realize that, listening to you this morning, I realized that, that there are certain synchronicities in life. And he said, actually this guy, he said to me, the third guy, he said, I wasn't going to be here today. Something came up and, I nearly couldn't make it. But now here I am and here I'm talking to you. And he said, I realized I need to go home and there's things I have to take care of. I have to do some work on myself, So yeah, I laughed my head off. I thought, wow, the universe has got a great sense of humor.
That's fantastic. And you were speaking about synchronicities, and I know something you deal with is also spiritual psychology, which is, recognizing synchronicity. So
Yes.
how much does the spiritual element of our life play a role in how we move through adversity, pain, anger, all those heavy emotions?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I mean, that's it's everything. It's everything. I've been teaching spiritual psychology now for 20 years. I've been studying it extensively for more than 20 years, and it's every soul has its own curriculum, right? And Earth is like it's a school, right? Earth is a school. And what it is the soul's opportunity to remember things and to come and experience things in human form. And it's a very deep conversation, and it can really trigger a lot of people because then you can't talk about spiritual psychology without actually talking about religion, right? And people say, well, what is religion then? And I studied religion when I came out of the military. I studied religion because I was traumatized, and I went to 2 Christian schools, and I had a lot of religious dogma. Before I even arrived at school, I was going to Sunday school. So I had a lot of religious dogma in my head, that was programmed into me throughout my education. And then when I came out of the military, I was conflicted, very, very conflicted about what I'd done. And what I was taught, at school about, religion and about God and about devil, etc., and heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff. So I went on a 6-year, deep study of all religion. And I arrived at the end of that with my own idea about what religion was and about what God was. And then still my education continued. And then I only really got a deep, deep understanding of what God was to me personally much later on in 1999 when I was in Hawaii and I had this amazing spiritual experience. However, every soul has its own curriculum here on earth, right? And you have to understand what you have to find out and really search for your own purpose here on earth. Everybody has a purpose, and we have all come here at this time by divine design, and there's no accidents, and everything is unfolding exactly as it should. The universe is constantly evolving, it's constantly expanding, and you have to discover what your own personal purpose is. And sometimes it's just simply a case of choosing it and saying, what, I decide this is going to be my purpose. I'm gonna go and make a difference for young people. I'm gonna go and build churches. I'm gonna go and live on an island and just be happy. There's no wrong and right here. This is the thing that we have in the human construct of being human, right? Is we've created this wrong and right, which creates a lot of problems. There's no wrong and right. There is only evolving, right? And so we have to recognize that we all have our own souls. Our soul has its own curriculum. And now while we're here in human form, we have to understand how to align the ego and the mental constructs of being human and attaining goals, achieving things, making a difference, making money, building a life, etc., with our soul's purpose. And so that means you have to align 3 levels of the mind, right? Which is your conscious, your unconscious, and your superconscious. And unfortunately, most people, although they're born with this beautiful conscious mind that's creative by nature, it becomes critical by nurture very, very quickly. And then they live in a critical aspect of an existence. really understand the beauty and the power of the unconscious, and they never ever discover the divine grace of their superconscious, which is their connection to God, right, or to the universe, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, right? We've got so many names for it, and everybody thinks their God's better than the other God, but it's all the same thing. And it's this beautiful grace that flows through us, and we are, and we can really tap into that in a very powerful level if we take care of the critical programming of our conscious mind from a young age, and we can really look at those constructs that have been placed in our minds unconsciously when we weren't paying attention as a young kid. Because the first 7 years of your life decides the rest of your life, right? For most people, your first 7 years of your life, the belief system, the values, the programming, all the stuff that you absorbed in those first 7 years when you formed your belief system about who you are and how you're going to play in this world and how you're going to make sure you stay safe. That's what most people are doing, right? It's like, how can I stay safe for the rest of my life? That's not how we're designed to live, right? The soul, there's this dichotomy taking place in every single human being. The soul is yearning for expression and freedom, and it's boundless, right? The soul is boundless. And yet the mind is yearning for, ownership and foundation and security and, I've got to own this and I've got to own this. And, and it wants to stay rooted in safety. So that's where people's main, internal conflict comes from. And so it's the most important thing. It's a long answer to your question, but it's the most important thing. Is like, why has your soul manifested in this body in this time right now?
Oh, everything you said is speaking straight to my soul, because, wow, I believe in it 100%. And it's
Beautiful.
Interesting we're having this conversation, synchronicity once again, because I was having a conversation with someone who does not believe in the whole essence of the soul and that kind of thing. And
Yes.
for me, how I interpreted it, and I said to them, certainty is a human being's greatest craving. We crave certainty. We want to make sure, like, will Allan love me? Will this job work out? That's what keeps us in these crippling fears. Yes. And I said the simplest way to know that there's something bigger than us in operation is when you fall in love for the first time, or when you're falling in love and you're in a room with a stranger. You have never met this human being in your life. And all of a sudden they walk into a room, and out of everyone in the room, you lock eyes, and there's a feeling there that is not conscious. It's not even like, you just know, I just want to get to know that person a whole lot better. And I think that's the conscious, like, that's when we're living in that conscious magic, right, of the universe or God or whatever it is that we want to call it. And so when you are teaching this essence of connecting to spiritual or becoming, living off the three brains and knowing which one layer of consciousness you're operating from, what's this first step you lead people to start even acknowledging that, maybe there is something out there that's greater than myself that's helping me on this path?
Yeah, well, I think the first step is just, the first step really is just about helping people to understand how they have created these mental constructs, or where these mental constructs come from about who they are as an identity, their fictional identity, their name, their vocation, their religion, their creed, their race, their nationality, etc., and all this fictional identity they've been given as a child before the age of 1, and now they've been taught to defend that fictional identity, and for a lot of people, defend it to the point of death, right? And it's really just it's a collection of beliefs, right? It's just a collection of mental constructs. None of that is accurate. But the next step is really then helping people to understand that actually, life is magical. It's just, when you really look at how life unfolds, you look at nature and you look at the seasons and you look at how, just how everything is just magical, right? And it's really, it takes there is a process to get into that kind of thinking for sure. But everybody can admit one thing. And this is what I ask people. I say, look back at your life and look at some of the most challenging experiences of your life, some of the most painful experiences of your life. And then ask yourself, had that not happened, would you be now in this point right now of your life right now? If you look at the gifts that you're enjoying right now, a lot of those gifts came from that experience, right? So therefore, then there must be some kind of magical, connection between everything, right? And it's also then helping people to understand if you look at, I like numbers, I like quantum physics, and I like, I like to marry facts to the mystical, right? So because because when you add both of them, a lot of people, most of us are being trained left brain, right? So it takes a while for people to get into the right brain. For those of us who have trained ourselves into our right brain thinking, it's easier for us to see the connections, the invisible connections. But it takes practice, right? We forget that we've actually practiced our way to that point in time. Other people are not so practiced in that way, although we all have that ability, because all of us have intuition and all of us are spiritual in nature, right? We all energy. So when you bring quantum physics into it and you talk about energy and you talk about molecules, atoms, electrons, etc., nobody can ever deny the fact that, everything we're looking at, although it appears solid, is 99.9% space, right? It's not there. It's because it's moving so quickly that it appears solid. And if you look at it under a microscope, it's not there. So, when you start bringing numbers and equations into it, like Einstein did, and you talk about, I always talk to people about the mathematical equation of them actually being born, and most people, they've never ever heard of that equation. But when you show them that equation, the mathematical numbers, and for them to actually be born right now in this time and space it's beyond a miracle. It actually shouldn't happen. It's like, the number is so big that it actually should not happen, and yet it still happens, and so when you start encouraging people and you put them in, I put people in an environment for 4 days, and we take them through this process. And so by the time they get to day 4, they have a very, very different understanding of what it is to be a human being, especially what it is to be them in their body at this time. And they look at their past in a very different way, and they look at their present in a very different way, and then consequently they look at their future in a very different way. And it's just a beautiful journey, to help people to wake up to the essence of who they really are, and actually to understand this. And we come back to religion, to help them to understand what a debilitating conversation religion has been for them in their life in the past, especially if they heavily invested into a religion. It's very debilitating. It's very limiting. It does not give the soul wings.
Wow.
And that can be a very tough thing for a lot of people to swallow, because especially if they're very, very, if they profoundly religious, or deeply religious. Yeah. But I think a lot of people are changing the conversation around that, especially younger people, I think even religion has realized that it has to transform, and it's late to the party, but it is transforming, I think. Especially, you've got new churches opening up, and, they have a very different way of talking about religion or talking about God. But it is a conversation that definitely needs to change, because there's so many people who are trapped in that conversation about being sinful, about, doing things wrong or making mistakes, etc., or being born a sinner and all that kind of stuff, and that's so debilitating for the human spirit, so debilitating and so constricting, and it causes so much pain. I mean, it's the cause of prostitution and sexual slavery. Is directly related back to the church's desire to ban sex.
Wow. And you were speaking about, showing people what it's like to be a human, right? Bringing them back to the essence of humanity and what that journey really is. And in your definition, what is that journey? Like, what is it? Because as you said a little bit earlier, each of us has our own soul's purpose, our own evolution, our own path. So how do you define it being a human being?
Well, I think it's something it's common for all human beings. It's the one commonality. It's just love, it's love and kindness. It's, I tell people, when you're resisting life, you're resisting yourself, and you're resisting nature, you're resisting God. So we have to look at areas where we resist life, and resistance creates persistence, right? So whatever you resist persists, right? And that phrase has been uttered by, Ram Dass and Wayne Dyer and Louise Hay and many other people for many years. But it's very, very true. When you resist something, it persists. A very simple exercise to demonstrate that is you just lean against the wall. if you keep leaning against that wall, the walls are going to keep leaning against you, right? Nothing's going to change. You have to actually take your hand off the wall and then move in a different direction. And so we designed to live in flow, right? And just to flow with life. And that means you have to trust life. Life knows what she's doing. God knows what he's doing. God knows what she's doing, whatever you want to call it. Life knows what she's doing. The universe knows what she's doing. It's been around for how long, right? I mean, life has been unfolding for millennia. And, for a human being, and that's how powerful the ego is, right? For human beings to think, oh, you know what? I know better than life, right? I know better. That is so, just so infantile, right? And so it really comes back down to love and kindness. How much can you love yourself? How much more can you love yourself? Like right now, today, how many more little activities can you perform today that shows kindness to yourself? How friendly are you with yourself? How kind are you to yourself? Doing little acts of kindness for yourself, treating yourself nicely. That means consequently, you will treat other people nicely. If you practice that, the more you practice that, the easier it is to resist other people. The easier it is to resist less around you, right? Resist other people less, resist life less, because now you're resisting yourself less. And then, so what happens is you're now getting into a flow state. And that's what life is. Life flows naturally. Look, the moon always comes up at nighttime somewhere. The sun always comes up in the morning somewhere, right? You always, spring always follows winter, right? And then, what follows spring is summer, and what follows summer is fall, right? It always happens that way. Gravity is existent all the time, 100% of the time. Gravity is a law. It's a universal law. There's universal laws. And when we can get into universal laws and really flow with universal law, it comes down to cause and effect. Are you at cause or are you at effect? And really, the fastest way to become cause in your life is to fall in love with yourself and life and everything around you, including your challenges, including the problems that you don't like, including the surprises that you're not expecting, and recognize that when they show up, you say, this is an opportunity to learn something, to grow, to add value, to go deeper, to release something, to heal something, because everything is happening for a reason. And so then that makes life more, it makes it fun, right? It makes it enjoyable, because now the next challenge it shows up is, okay, great. What am I going to learn here? How am I going to profit from this experience? And how can I help other people profit from my education during this experience, right? It changes everything.
Oh, I love that. And it brought a saying to mind by Mother Teresa, who said, in order to heal the world, we must first heal ourselves, right? And so I think that is so powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And the quote that you mentioned from Winston earlier, I've never heard that one. I love that one, because I thought you were going to talk about the one, if you're going through hell, keep going. But the one you said, just say it again about the soul.
Oh, yes. I'd rather have the whole world against me than my own soul.
I love that. And I love this one by Mother Teresa too. But she also said, and I should say not but, and she also said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family.
That's it, right? And so I think so many of us want to heal everything around us, but really, do we really focus on ourselves? And you had such a beautiful point there about when we are going through the storm of life, because that's a part of the flow, that's a part of reality and existence.
Yes.
However, I think, as you are speaking right now, and you're telling it with passion and joyfully, and you're speaking in this really positive state. However, when challenges present themselves, even when you are spiritual, even when you are in alignment and something goes really wrong that you weren't expecting, the first thing you think is that, wow, I'm going to learn incredible lessons from this. Maybe you are, definitely not me, but
no, listen, I know what you're going to say. Yeah, listen, sometimes, of course, look, I think one of my most challenging environments is in my car when I'm in traffic, right? And many years ago, I'd be the worst driver, especially here in London, because the traffic's so crazy. And I would get really irate, right? But over time, I recognized that was a beautiful opportunity to build muscle, right? And to build like emotional muscle, because, really the quality of your life comes down to how emotionally intelligent you are in any environment, especially when you get triggered, right? Especially when something catches you by surprise. Like, how quickly can you get back to your center? And a long time ago, I've been working with Tony Robbins closely for 22 years, and I get to spend a lot of time in that environment as one of his trainers, which has been a real blessing and a real gift. I've learned so much from him. And I remember several years ago, we were at a date with Destiny. He said, you know, he'd been practicing something for the last several months. He'd been practicing giving himself 90 seconds from the moment he gets triggered, and he could be getting some news like, you know, they've just lost $2 million, you know, or they've just lost a deal or whatever. Or he just discovered something had gone wrong in one of his multiple businesses. And he would get really irate and upset about that for a period of time. And it would last sometimes weeks, right? And then he gave himself a task. He said, I'm going to give myself 90 seconds. He had just spent some time in India before that, where he had this amazing experience. And he said, I'm going to give myself 90 seconds to get back to my peaceful center. And when he started telling people about that, he said some of his friends said, oh, that's crazy, man, 90 seconds. But he practiced it. And you know, Tony's an incredible human being, right? And when he puts his mind to something, he makes it happen. And so when he said that, I said to myself, I said, you know what? I'm going to practice that. So, and then I thought, where's the best environment for me to practice that? I thought, in my car, in the traffic, right? And so I began to practice that. And now I can tell you, when you practice something like daily, like I go to the gym every day, right? Well, 6 days a week. And when you practice anything, whether it's physical exercise, health, eating, whatever it is, if you practice consistently, you got the compound effect, right? And eventually the compound effect, Darren Hardy wrote the great book, The Compound Effect, brilliant book. You know, the compound effect of little effort every single day, it adds up. You know, honestly, I can tell you right now, I get triggered every day. I'm a human being, right? But within 10 seconds, and I'm not kidding, within 10 seconds, I'm back to my center because I have a system. When I get triggered, when I get triggered, it doesn't matter if it's in the traffic or with my daughter. You know, my daughter's, you know, her and I love my daughter, you know, she's 17. We've had our challenges. She's got the same temperament as me. She was also one of the biggest growth opportunities for me was my daughter. My son was different, you know, boys are different. But I gave myself this system, right? So when I get triggered, I go through the system and within 10 seconds, I'm back to my center and I'm reminding myself about what's important. And anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. It just takes practice. It takes diligent practice and a commitment to the result. Like, what are you committed to? Are you committed to being pissed off? Or are you committed to being peaceful and in a loving state where you can serve people that really matter, right? Or that the people that you really care about, you know, because then what happens is your life flourishes as a result of that, right? And then when you meet those people, they don't even have to open their mouth. Look at Nelson Mandela, right? I never got a chance to meet him, but I know people who have met him. Some friends of mine have met him. And, you know, he was the kind of person they said, he didn't even open his mouth. You just, if he came in the room behind you and you were facing the other way, you could feel his presence, right? Because he had such a vibration, such an aura. Tony Robbins is like that. The Dalai Lama is like that. You know, Louise Hay was like that. You know, Maya Angelou was like that. You know, there's so many people like that because they've practiced. They've got their own personal discipline because they've made a very conscious decision about who they want to be on this world and how they want to affect people. And that's what it takes, right? It's about being conscious, deciding who you want to be and what kind of mark you want to have on people. You know, what do you want people to say about you when you're not around, when you leave the room, right?
That is incredibly powerful. And once again, it brings me to another quote, which is, you are responsible for the energy you bring into a space. You are responsible for that vibrational frequency. And
100%.
It came from a woman. She was in ICU, and she said, as she was lying there, she couldn't communicate, but she could take in her environment. And she said the one thing she noticed above all else was the energy that people were coming in with. Some people came and actually left her feeling uplifted, and some people came and she just couldn't handle it, you know? And I think that's in everyday life. Like, some people come into a room and you can't wait for them to leave. And other people come into a room and the lights just come on, you know, and you're like, whoa, I'm just so happy to be in this person's presence. And that is so important. But
that's such a powerful indication of us as energetic beings. That's what we are. We are energetic beings. You know, we have an aura, and our aura sometimes is very like heavy and quite restricted and, you know, condensed. And other times our aura is, you know, much bigger and lighter, because it depends on what mood we're in, what we're focusing on, what's going on in our head, you know, the news we've just had, you know, whether we're in love or not, etc., or, you know, going through a breakup or just falling in love. It's so many things, right? It's so important. Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just, before we get to the end of our interview, for people who are going through, because you spoke about the 10 seconds or Tony's 90 seconds, as we go through life, some things are going to trigger us a little less, right? Like the person who chirped you and you just like, or like the person in traffic, as opposed to maybe a divorce or a death or something like that. So when you're dealing with these bigger traumas or these bigger triggers, do we still revert back to the 10 seconds, or is there a different process for that?
Well, there is a different process for something like that. And there has been times in my life where, even recently, where something happened and it's you find your mind going back there, maybe a couple of hours later or the next day, or you wake up in the morning thinking about it, or you can't sleep at night, it's still on your mind. There is a deeper process for that, for sure. But what I do is I remind myself at times like that there's always a reason for things happening. There's always a reason that maybe I can't see right now. And I even say something like that. I say, even though I don't understand this right now, I know there's going to be a deeper reason for this that's going to unfold over time, and I'm going to learn something from this experience. It's going to make me a much wiser, more powerful person. And so I just remind myself about the process of life and how things unfold. I also remind myself that whatever's showing up in my life, I attracted it, right? And even though my ego's protesting, I am responsible for everything in my life. Everything that shows up, I take 100% responsibility for, even though my ego's protesting and wants to say, oh, it's her fault, it's his fault, it's their fault, etc. I know that's just my ego's process. And so I remind myself about that. And then I just remind myself about that the only thing I am really in this moment in time is the energy that I'm bringing to this space. You said that just now very powerfully. That's all I am, right? And the past is just the trail that I've left behind. However, if I look back, the only time I should look back is to ask myself, what can I learn about that experience that is going to affect me right now and help me to affect other people going forward? So yeah, there are definitely things that might take a little bit longer than 10 seconds for sure. But in the moment, you can still remind yourself in those 10 seconds to come back to your place and then to ask yourself a much more powerful question, because you can't ask yourself a powerful question if you're completely irate, or if you're upset, or if you're angry. You can't say to yourself, what's the benefit of this experience right now? Your brain's not going to have that capacity because you just focused on being right. I also remind myself, of something that I learned from A Course in Miracles, right? You can either be right or be in love. And, I'd rather be in love. And when I say in love, I mean in love with life, in love with the moment, in love with myself, in love with what's showing up, because then my mood is elevated, my vibration is higher, my my ability to attract great possibilities is much more higher, right? So I'd rather be in love than be right, because I know that when I'm right, somebody else is wrong, and I don't like to make people wrong. I did a lot of that when I was young. I made a lot of people wrong because I always felt wrong. I always felt there was something wrong with me. So consequently, I was trying to make other people wrong, so I didn't feel so wrong about myself, right? And that's what we are doing all the time. That's what people are doing without realizing it. By making other people feel insignificant, it makes us feel significant. And really, significance is only powerful if you're doing it from a great place, if it's constructive, and if it's impacting other people positively.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I can't believe it feels like this interview literally flew by. But I've got two final questions for you. And the one is, what is real success to you?
Real success is just being happy with whatever shows up. Being happy for no reason. There's so many definitions of success, isn't there? But really, I think success is just being happy with what you've got, being content, as well as understanding that, there is a desire in you to create and to build and to experience more. But it's being present in the moment, staying present and being happy with what shows up, just happy for no reason. That's taken me, oh my gosh, in December, Candice, I turned 55 in December, right? And on the 26th of December. And I remember I thinking to myself, wow, I'm 55, right? I thought, gosh, And then I thought, I'm really happy. I've been happy for quite a while, but it's the happiest time I've never been happier. I'm very happy, very content. I'm surrounded by amazing people. And and you know, a lot of people have been asked the question, what happens if it was all taken away? If it was all taken away right now, I know that that would be okay, because I have the tools and the experience and the understanding that I would be able to start all over again, and I would be able to do it in a much more in a different way, because I would be more wise about it. But yeah, success is individual for each person. But I say to people, you will never truly feel successful until you can feel happy for no reason, because happiness is a natural state. It comes from a place of peace. It comes from a place of being content, and your soul is peaceful by nature, completely peaceful by nature, because it's connected to everything. It's the essence of who you are. It's the essence of this universe, which is unconditional love. And unconditional love at its highest level is total acceptance of everything that shows up, without any judgment whatsoever, with zero resistance. And that's a place of complete happiness, because then there's nothing else that you want, right?
Oh, that is a phenomenal definition of real success. And then the final question is, what is something about you that we will not find on Google?
Oh my God, there's a lot. There's a lot. Oh gosh. Some of which I've shared from the stage. You know, I love telling stories, and you know, and by my own admission, I'm a great storyteller. I'm very entertaining when I'm on stage, and I have told some of those things that you won't find on Google. But what can I share with you right now? Gosh, oh my gosh, what won't you find on Google? Okay, what can I share? Well, I'll share this, because I don't think this is anywhere on Google. Well, actually, it might be on a couple of videos or etc. But I have the most amazing ex-wife, right? Like, just amazing. You know, I truly, and even just talking about it now, I feel quite emotional, because you know, she's an amazing human being. She's also a coach, and she's just she's very, 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 very certified in so many different disciplines. And she did so great with our kids, you know. And you know, I was unfaithful during our marriage, and you know, we separated, we got divorced. That happened, what are we now, 2022? Yeah, that happened 10 years ago now. But we were able to build a great friendship. We were able to do a lot of healing work individually and as a team, and the four of us together. But I feel so blessed, you know, to have her as the mother of my kids, as a friend, as my ex-wife. And so many people don't have that blessing, you know. So many of my friends don't have that blessing. So I mean, you probably won't find that anywhere in Google. Although I have interviewed her a couple of times for my own membership group. We've spoken on stage once since we got divorced, which was very interesting here in London. She was the first speaker. We were four speakers. I was the last speaker. She was the first speaker. She spoke about this ex-husband and what she went through and the pain, etc., and then the learning experience. And most of the audience was women, and there was lots of ahs and oohs and oh. And then I was the last speaker, and then I was speaking, and I said, "Wow, Maxine's talk earlier, wasn't that powerful, right?" You know, and spoke about that ex-husband. I said, "Wow, gosh," and I said, "You know, I'm the ex-husband, right?" And you know, and you could hear the jaws drop into the laps, right? And like the gasp, right? And so yeah, I mean, you probably won't find that in quite as much detail on Google. And you know, when I talk about that, you know, I mean, if I was young, a lot younger then, a lot less wiser, and you know, and I always talk about powerful communication, and that's something that I did not exercise at that time of my life. As a result, you know, I broke a lot of hearts, my own included, my children, my ex-wife, her mother, my mother, etc. My mother didn't speak to me for about a year after that. However, I learned a lot. I learned a lot out of that. And you know, it's been quite a journey from there, you know, and a lot of that has played a big role in who I've become as a father, you know, and as a man, as a friend, and especially as a partner in a relationship, you know, because there's just things that I will not, you know, that there's certain things I will not ever do again because of that experience, and there's certain things I've learned. So yeah, you probably won't find that in as much detail on Google. And I'm happy to talk about that. And I do talk about that when I'm in on the stage and that, because I think that relationship is, so you know yourself. I don't know if you're in a relationship or not, but you've been in relationships. Relationship is probably the most challenging experience of our lives, right? Because we want to give our hearts away and we want to be in love, but we're also so afraid of what's going to happen, if we do that. So it's a very interesting experience being in a relationship, and you can learn so much from it. And I learned so much from that experience. And, Maxine and I, we talk on a regular basis, and, she's very happy now. She's engaged to a beautiful man. My kids think he's great. I'm so happy. It's been an interesting journey full of beautiful blessings.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's, our romantic relationships. I always say in my talks that our romantic partners are our closest mirror, because in this one human being, you want to heal all your childhood traumas. And at the same time, they want to do the same with you. So it's just, it's a journey. It's a journey.
Yeah, it is. It is beautiful.
It is a beautiful journey. Allan, it has been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much. It's been
my friend. Thank
interview.
You so much. It's so lovely to meet you in person. You are such a beautiful soul. I can see. I just feel your energy coming through the screen.
Oh, thank you, Allan. I appreciate it. I loved speaking to Allan, and I'm sure you enjoyed listening. So please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment. We want to know what about this episode stood out for you. As always, it has been my greatest honor and privilege to serve you, and I look forward to doing it again next week.